The power had been out for exactly 47 minutes when Margaret knocked on my door like she was trying to break through it with her fists alone. I was sitting in my living room in Prescott, Arizona, reading a book by the fireplace, perfectly comfortable despite the January cold snap that had knocked out electricity across half the subdivision. The natural gas heating system in my century-old Victorian house hummed along just fine without electricity, keeping me warm while the rest of Whispering Pines struggled with their electric heating systems going dark. "Samuel Garrett, I know you are in there." Margaret's shrill voice penetrated through my solid oak door. "This is an emergency situation, and as a resident of Whispering Pines, you have obligations to fulfill." I marked my page and walked to the door, already knowing this conversation was not going to go well. Margaret Thornton was the HOA president, a woman in her late 40s who had somehow made controlling every aspect of the neighborhood her full-time career. Her blonde hair was always styled in that same helmet-like bob, and her voice had a quality that could probably shatter glass if she hit just the right frequency. I opened the door to find her standing there with two other board members, Linda and Karen, both bundled up in winter coats and looking miserable. The temperature had dropped to about 15 degrees, which was brutal for Arizona, even in January. "Yes, Margaret," I kept my tone neutral. "The community center is freezing," she announced, as if this was somehow my problem. "We have opened it as an emergency warming center for residents who cannot heat their homes. However, the electric heating system is not functioning. I have been informed that your house runs on natural gas heat." "That's correct. Then you need to bring your portable heaters to the community center immediately. We have 17 families there right now, including children and elderly residents." I leaned against my doorframe. "Margaret, I do not have portable heaters. I have a whole house natural gas system. It's not portable." Her face flushed red, a color I had become familiar with over the 3 years since I bought my property. "That is unacceptable. As an HOA member, you are required to assist in community emergencies." "I'm sorry people are cold, but I literally cannot help with what you're asking. My heating system is built into my house." Karen, whose full name was Karen Miller, stepped forward. She was slightly younger than Margaret, maybe early 40s, with that same entitled expression. "The community center has natural gas lines. Can't you just go over there and turn something on?" "The community center runs on electric heating," I explained patiently. "The gas lines there are only for the kitchen appliances." "Then figure something out," Margaret snapped. "You are always so difficult, Samuel. Ever since you moved here, you have been nothing but problematic. You refuse to follow simple guidelines about lawn ornaments. You painted your house the wrong shade of approved beige, and you park that monstrosity of a truck in your driveway instead of your garage." "My truck fits in my driveway, which is allowed. The paint color was approved by the board before I applied it. You just changed your mind after. And the lawn ornament thing was about the historical marker, which predates your HOA by about 90 years. Linda, the quietest of the three, spoke up. "We're not here to rehash old arguments. We just need help. Can you please just come look at the community center and see if there is anything you can do?" I sighed. I did not particularly like Margaret or Karen, but I was not a monster. People were cold. "Fine. Let me get my coat." The walk to the community center took about 10 minutes. Whispering Pines was one of those subdivisions that had been built up around older properties, and my Victorian house sat on what used to be the main homestead of a much larger ranch. The development company had built around it in the early 2000s, and somehow the original HOA had been reasonable enough that the previous owner decided to join voluntarily for access to the community amenities. That reasonable HOA had been replaced 3 years ago when Margaret's faction took over. The community center was indeed packed with cold, miserable-looking people. Families huddled under blankets, and someone had gotten the bright idea to light the decorative fireplace, which was at least providing some warmth to the immediate area around it. Margaret led me to the back where the utility room was located. There, she pointed triumphantly at a natural gas line. Hook your heat up to that. Margaret, that's a 3/4-inch supply line for a gas stove. It cannot support a heating system large enough to warm this entire building. Even if I had a portable heater, which I do not. You are being deliberately unhelpful. I am being realistic about physics and infrastructure. Well, what do you suggest? Karen demanded. We cannot just let these people freeze. I looked around the utility room, thinking. The power company said 4 to 6 hours before restoration. At best, Linda confirmed. Could be longer. Something about ice on the lines up near the main substation. An idea formed, one I probably should have kept to myself. The community center could theoretically be heated with natural gas, if you had the right equipment. There are portable natural gas heaters designed for emergency situations, but you would need to rent them from Flagstaff or Phoenix, and installation would require a licensed technician to make sure everything is up to code. Margaret's eyes lit up. Perfect. You can handle that. No, I cannot. I am not a licensed gas technician, but you know about these systems. Knowing about them and being licensed to modify gas lines are two different things. You need to call a professional. On a Saturday night during a power outage, do you have any idea what that would cost? I shrugged. That's not my problem, Margaret. You asked what could be done. I told you. Whether you want to pay for it is up to you. She crossed her arms. The HOA will not pay for that. This is an emergency and you clearly have the means to help. I am officially invoking Section 47 of the HOA bylaws, which states that in times of community emergency, all members must contribute available resources for the common good. I actually laughed. Margaret, that section is about clearing storm debris and sharing sandbags during floods. It does not give you the right to commandeer my heating system or demand I perform unlicensed gas work. We will see what the board thinks about your lack of community spirit. You mean the board that is standing right here with you. Feel free to vote on it. The three women huddled together, whispering furiously. I took the opportunity to check my phone. The power company's website estimated restoration by midnight, maybe sooner. It was currently 7:30. People would be uncomfortable, but 4 or 5 hours in a crowded room with a working fireplace would not kill anyone. Margaret turned back to me. The board has decided that your refusal to assist constitutes a violation of community standards. You will be fined $500 per day until you comply. You cannot fine me for not doing something that is literally impossible. We will let the lawyers decide that. I left the community center before I said something I would regret. The walk home was cold and dark, with only the moon and my phone's flashlight to guide me. I could hear generators running at a few houses where people had been smart enough to buy backup power. Back in my warm house, I poured myself a whiskey and tried to forget about the whole situation. The power would come back on, people would warm up, and Margaret would move on to harassing someone else about their mailbox height or garbage can visibility. That lasted until Monday morning, when I found an official violation notice on my door. $500 for failure to provide emergency assistance. The notice cited the completely irrelevant Section 47 and gave me 15 days to pay or face additional penalties. I called my lawyer, Tom Rodriguez, who I had unfortunately needed to keep on retainer since Margaret's board took over. "They cannot do this," Tom said after I explained the situation. "That bylaw does not apply here, and they absolutely cannot require you to perform specialized work or modify your personal property." "I know that. You know that. Margaret does not care. Do not pay the fine. I will send them a letter. This will go away." It did not go away. Tom's letter was met with another violation notice, this time for interfering with HOA business by involving a lawyer. Another $500. "That one is even more illegal than the first one," Tom said cheerfully. "You cannot fine someone for seeking legal counsel. If they push this, you will own the HOA." "I do not want to own the HOA. I want them to leave me alone. Then we file a harassment claim and get an injunction. I can have papers ready by Wednesday." "Do it." Wednesday brought another complication. I came home from my job at the civil engineering firm to find a notice on my door that the HOA had scheduled an emergency special assessment for all residents. $2,000 each, due within 30 days, to upgrade emergency preparedness infrastructure. I read through the detailed proposal with growing disbelief. They wanted to install a natural gas heating system in the community center. The cost estimate was absurdly inflated, at least triple what the work should actually cost. And buried in the fine print was a clause stating that I would be required to provide technical consultation on the project at no charge, as compensation for my failure to assist during the January power outage emergency. They were literally trying to make me pay $2,000 for the privilege of being forced to work for free on a project that only existed because Margaret could not handle being told no. Tom laughed so hard when I forwarded him the documents that I could hear him wheezing. "This is the most blatantly illegal thing I have ever seen an HOA try to pull. This is going to be fun. I am glad you are enjoying yourself. Samuel, I am serious when I say this could get them removed from the board. Possibly even criminal charges for misappropriation, if we can prove they are inflating costs to skim money. Let me do some digging." Thursday afternoon, Tom called me at work and his tone had shifted from amused to serious. "Samuel, I need you to pull out your property records. The original deed and any title documentation." "Why?" "Because I am looking at the development history of Whispering Pines, and something is not adding up. Your property predates the subdivision by over 100 years, right?" "Right. It was the original Garrett ranch. My great-great-grandfather built the house in 1887. My family sold off most of the land in 2003, but kept the original 5-acre parcel with the house. And when you inherited it from your uncle, the HOA was already established." "Yes." "Uncle Robert joined voluntarily in 2005 to get access to the community pool and the maintenance services. It was optional for existing properties." "Okay, and what utilities does your property use?" "Well, electricity comes from the main grid like everyone else. Water is from the community well system that the HOA manages. And natural gas is from the old ranch line that my great-great-grandfather had installed back in the 1950s when gas became available out here." There was a long pause. "Samuel, where does that gas line connect to?" "The main supply line runs from a distribution point on my property. It is connected to the regional pipeline that comes up from the south." "Why?" Another pause, even longer. "Are you telling me that your property has a direct connection to a natural gas transmission pipeline?" "Well, yes. The ranch was here long before the subdivision. When the gas company ran lines through this area in the 50s, my great-great-grandfather negotiated right-of-way access through ranch land in exchange for a direct connection point. It was pretty common back then for large rural properties." "Samuel, I need you to go home right now and find every document related to that gas line. Deeds, easements, right-of-way agreements, everything." "Tom, what is going on? If I am right about this, Margaret just made the biggest mistake of her life. Go home. I will meet you there in an hour." I left work early, telling my boss I had a family emergency. At home, I dug through the filing cabinet where Uncle Robert had kept all the property records. There were decades of documents, some dating back to the original land grant. The gas line paperwork was in a folder labeled Utilities Gas Service. I was reading through a document from 1957 when Tom arrived with another man I did not recognize. "Samuel, this is Bill Henderson. He is a land use attorney who specializes in utility easements." Bill was a tall, thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses. He shook my hand and immediately asked to see the documents. I spread them out on my dining room table. Bill read in silence for about 10 minutes, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Finally, he looked up at me and said, "Mr. Garrett, are you aware that you do not just have a gas line on your property? You own the distribution point for the entire regional gas supply." "I what?" Tom was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Tell him the rest." Bill pulled out one of the older documents, a yellowed paper from 1956. "When the Southwest Gas Corporation ran their transmission line through this area, they negotiated an easement with your great-great-grandfather, Thomas Garrett. In exchange for right-of-way access, the company granted the Garrett family ownership of the distribution hub and all downstream connections within a 5-mile radius." I stared at him. "In English, please. You own the gas infrastructure that supplies this entire area. Not the transmission pipeline itself, but the distribution system. The community of Whispering Pines and about 200 other properties in the surrounding area receive their natural gas through a network that you legally own. That cannot be right. People pay Southwest Gas for their service. They pay Southwest Gas for the gas itself and for maintenance of the transmission pipeline. But the local distribution is yours. Southwest Gas likely has a long-term lease agreement with you for operational purposes." Tom pulled out another document, this one more recent. "Here it is. A 99-year lease agreement signed in 1956, renewable automatically unless terminated by the property owner. You, as the current property owner, can terminate this lease with 6 months' notice." I sat down hard. "So you are saying I could shut off the gas to the entire neighborhood?" "Legally speaking, yes," Bill said. "Though I would not recommend it. However, what you can do is renegotiate the terms of the lease, or more importantly, you can use this as leverage. The HOA has no authority over your property at all when it comes to utilities. In fact, they are dependent on your goodwill for their natural gas service." "Does Margaret know about this?" "I seriously doubt it," Tom said. "This is buried in century-old property records. The HOA probably has no idea about the original infrastructure agreements." An idea was forming, one that was probably petty but felt deeply satisfying. So when Margaret tried to fine me for not helping with the heating situation, she was attempting to extort the person who literally controls whether or not her house has heat, Tom finished. "Yes. And this special assessment to install natural gas heating at the community center." Bill flipped through the proposal. "If they install new gas infrastructure, it will be connecting to your distribution system. According to these documents, any new connections require written approval from the property owner. That would be you. Without your permission, they cannot legally connect to the gas supply." I started laughing. I could not help it. The absurdity of the situation was too much. Margaret had spent 3 years making my life difficult over paint colors and lawn ornaments, and now she was trying to force me to fund and work on a project that I could simply refuse to allow. "What do I do?" I asked when I finally stopped laughing. Tom and Bill exchanged looks. "That depends on what you want," Tom said. "We could simply inform the HOA that the special assessment is denied because you will not approve the gas connection. That ends their construction plan." "Or," I prompted, because his tone suggested there was another option. "Or we could make a point," Bill said. "The HOA has been harassing you with illegal fines and attempting to force you into unpaid labor. We could respond by formally notifying them of your ownership of the gas distribution system and your intention to review the current lease terms." "That sounds ominous." "It is meant to," Tom said. "You would not actually shut off anyone's gas, but the threat of a lease renegotiation would put the HOA on the defensive. They would have to back off on all their ridiculous demands because they cannot risk you getting vindictive." It was tempting, but something felt wrong about it. Would that affect regular homeowners, people who have nothing to do with Margaret's power trip? "Potentially," Bill admitted. "If you renegotiated the lease terms, costs could be passed on to customers. You would not be making friends." "Then I do not want to do that. I do not have a problem with the neighborhood, just with Margaret and her board." "There is a middle ground," Tom suggested. "We inform the HOA board privately about your ownership of the gas infrastructure. We make it clear that you could create problems if you wanted to, but you are choosing not to because you are not a petty person. However, they need to immediately drop all fines, cancel the special assessment, and stop harassing you. If they agree, everyone moves on with their lives. And if they do not agree, then we go public with it and let the homeowners know that their HOA almost got their gas shut off because Margaret could not handle being told no." That seemed fair. "Okay, let's try the reasonable approach first." Tom drafted a letter that afternoon. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, polite and professional, while making the threat absolutely clear. The letter outlined my ownership of the gas distribution system, cited the relevant property records, and noted that while I had no intention of disrupting service to the community, I was within my rights to deny any new connections or modifications to the existing infrastructure. The letter further stated that the previously issued fines were illegal and must be rescinded immediately, with written confirmation. The special assessment must be canceled, and all future HOA actions that attempted to compel my participation or access to my private property would be met with appropriate legal action. The kicker was the final paragraph, which politely noted that I would be happy to discuss these matters at the next board meeting, and that I hoped we could resolve everything amicably without needing to involve the broader community or the gas company. Tom delivered the letter personally to Margaret on Friday afternoon. I was not there, but he called me immediately afterward. "She did not take it well," he said, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "Define not well." "She called me a liar, threatened to sue both of us for harassment, and slammed the door in my face. But not before I saw her face go completely white when she got to the part about you owning the gas distribution system. So she did not agree to our terms. She said, and I quote, 'Samuel Garrett does not own anything except a falling down old house and an attitude problem.' Then she told me she would have me disbarred for making false statements." "Can she do that?" "No," Tom said, laughing, "but she can try. This is going to get interesting." Interesting was one word for it. By Saturday morning, I had received an email from Margaret demanding that I provide proof of my claims regarding the gas infrastructure. The email was CC'd to the entire HOA board and included several paragraphs about how I was attempting to intimidate the board with false legal threats. I forwarded the email to Tom, who sent back a brief reply. Do not respond. Let me handle this. What Tom handled it with was a formal legal package delivered to each board member individually. The package included copies of all the relevant property records, the original 1956 easement agreement, the lease agreement with Southwest Gas, and a letter from Bill Henderson explaining the legal implications in detail. He also sent a copy to the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Palmer who I had met once and seemed like a reasonable person who probably hated his client. Monday morning, Richard Palmer called me directly. Mr. Garrett, this is Richard Palmer. I represent the Whispering Pines HOA. I need to verify some information with you. Okay. Is it true that you own the natural gas distribution infrastructure for this area? According to my property records and the attorney who reviewed them, yes. And you have the legal right to deny new connections or modifications to that system. That is what I have been told, yes. There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. Mr. Garrett, I am going to be very frank with you. I was not aware of this situation until your attorney provided documentation. The HOA board was not aware of it either. This significantly changes the legal landscape of several recent actions the board has taken. I would think so. I am going to recommend to my client that they accept your terms immediately. The fines will be rescinded, the special assessment will be canceled, and the board will issue a formal apology for the harassment. That sounds good. However, I need to know if you intend to take any further action regarding the gas infrastructure. My clients are understandably concerned about their access to natural gas service. I chose my words carefully. Mr. Palmer, I have no intention of disrupting anyone's gas service. I did not even know I owned the distribution system until last week. I just want the HOA to leave me alone. If they can do that, I am happy to forget this whole situation ever happened. That is very reasonable of you. I will convey that to the board. There is one more thing, I added. I want it in writing that the HOA acknowledges they have no authority over my property regarding utility infrastructure. I do not want this coming up again in 5 years with a different board. I think that can be arranged. I will draft something and send it to your attorney for review. The call ended on a surprisingly cordial note. I actually felt a little bad for Richard Palmer. He seemed like a decent guy stuck with a nightmare client. Tuesday evening, there was an emergency board meeting. I was not invited, which was fine with me. But Linda, who had always been the most reasonable of the 3 board members, called me afterward. Samuel, I wanted to apologize, she said, sounding genuinely upset. I had no idea Margaret was going to push things this far. The fines, the special assessment, all of it was way over the line. I appreciate that, Linda. She is not backing down, though. Even after the lawyer explained everything, she is convinced you are somehow bluffing. She wants to move forward with the special assessment and force the issue. Can she do that if you and Karen vote against it? That is the thing. Karen is backing her up. They have the votes. I am outnumbered. I felt a headache coming on. What exactly did Richard Palmer tell them? He told them that your documentation appears legitimate, and that moving forward with the gas line installation without your permission could result in legal action. He strongly recommended accepting your terms. Margaret accused him of being incompetent and said she would find a new attorney if he would not fight for the board's rights. The board does not have rights to my property. I know that. You know that. Margaret thinks that because the HOA bylaws say they control community infrastructure, that includes the gas lines. The gas lines that existed 100 years before the HOA was created. Logic is not Margaret's strong suit. Look, I am voting against the special assessment. But it is going to pass 2-1, and then you are going to have to actually fight them on this. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Thanks, Linda. I appreciate it. The special assessment notice went out to all homeowners on Wednesday. $2,000 each, due in 30 days, for emergency preparedness infrastructure improvements. The notice included detailed plans for installing a natural gas heating system in the community center, complete with impressive-sounding technical specifications that probably came straight from the contractor, who was bidding way too high on the job. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Neighbors who I barely knew called to complain about the cost. Several people asked if I really was refusing to let them improve the community center. One guy accused me of trying to hold the neighborhood hostage. I patiently explained to each person that I had no problem with improving the community center, but the proposed work required connecting to gas infrastructure that I legally owned, and the HOA had not asked my permission. I also pointed out that I was being charged the same $2,000 as everyone else to fund a project that literally required my cooperation. Most people understood once I explained it. A few thought I was being petty. One person suggested I just approve the connection and move on with my life. That person was probably right, but I was tired of Margaret treating me like her personal problem child. The principle mattered now. Thursday brought a new development. A contractor's truck showed up at the community center, and workers started marking out where they would dig to install the new gas lines. I walked over to see what was happening. The foreman was a weathered guy in his 50s named Dave. "Help you?" he asked. "Just curious what you are working on." Gas line installation. Supposed to start Monday if the permits come through. Did the HOA mention anything about getting approval from the property owner who controls the gas distribution system? Dave looked at me blankly. What? I explained the situation as briefly as I could. His expression went from confused to annoyed to deeply tired. Are you kidding me? They did not mention any of this. We put in a bid based on standard installation procedures. If there is an ownership dispute over the infrastructure, we cannot touch it. There is no dispute. I own it. I just have not given permission for this connection. Dave pulled out his phone and made a call. I could not hear the other end of the conversation, but his side consisted mostly of I see, and this is a problem. He hung up and looked at me. My boss says we are out. We are not installing anything without proper authorization from all relevant parties. The HOA lady said this was all cleared and approved. Margaret Thornton. That is the one. She is a piece of work. We dealt with her on another project last year and she tried to stiff us on the final payment. Why did you take another job with her? Money is money. But not if it lands us in a legal mess. Thanks for the heads up. The contractor packed up and left. I went home, knowing this was only going to escalate the situation. Friday morning, Margaret was at my door again. This time she had Karen with her, and both women looked furious. You contacted our contractor and sabotaged the project, Margaret said without preamble. I informed the contractor that the project requires my permission, which you do not have. We do not need your permission. The gas lines in this community are community infrastructure. The gas lines in this community are connected to a distribution system that I own. You need my permission to modify or connect to that system. Karen stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. You are being completely unreasonable. We are trying to help the community, and you are throwing legal technicalities around like some kind of bully. I am a bully. You are trying to fine me, force me to work for free, and charge me $2,000 to fund a project that requires my property. And I am the bully. You are taking advantage of some ancient paperwork to hold the entire neighborhood hostage, Margaret said. This is elder abuse and exploitation. I actually laughed at that. Elder abuse. Margaret, I am 42. Who exactly am I abusing? The elderly residents who depend on the community center for emergency services. You are denying them safety and comfort because of your petty grudge against the board. I am not denying anyone anything. The community center has electric heating. It works fine unless there is a power outage, which happens maybe once every few years. You want to spend $40,000 of the community's money to install a backup heating system that I am not convinced anyone actually needs. It is not your decision to make, Karen said. Actually, it is. You need my permission to connect to my gas infrastructure. I am not giving it. Margaret's face was turning that familiar shade of red. We will sue you. We will take this to court and a judge will force you to allow the connection. You can try. But your own attorney already told you that you would lose. And while you are wasting the HOA's money on legal fees, maybe the homeowners will start asking why you are fighting so hard for a project that we do not actually need. We will see about that, Margaret snapped. She turned and stormed off with Karen following behind. Linda called me that evening. You really poked the bear. Margaret is talking about calling an emergency homeowners meeting to vote you out of the HOA. Can she do that? No, your property is not actually required to be in the HOA. Remember, your uncle joined voluntarily. The HOA bylaws do not allow for forced removal of members, especially not members who were never required to join in the first place. So, what is the point of the meeting? To turn the other homeowners against you. She's going to paint you as the villain who is blocking community improvements. Should I be worried? Linda paused. Honestly, maybe. If enough people get angry, they could make your life difficult. Social pressure, that kind of thing. More difficult than it already is. Fair point. The homeowners' meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening at the community center. I debated not going, but Tom convinced me that I needed to present my side of the story. If you do not show up, Margaret controls the narrative completely. You need to be there to explain the facts. The community center was packed when I arrived. Apparently, the promise of drama had brought out people who had never attended an HOA meeting in their lives. I recognized most of the faces, at least vaguely. Whispering Pines had about 200 homes, and it looked like at least half of them had sent representatives. Margaret stood at the front of the room with Karen, both of them looking grimly satisfied. Linda sat off to the side, looking uncomfortable. Margaret called the meeting to order and launched into a prepared speech about community values and mutual responsibility. She painted the special assessment as a necessary safety measure, something that would protect families and children during emergencies. She talked about the power outage, emphasizing the cold, scared people who had suffered in the community center without heat. Then she turned to me. Samuel Garrett has refused to support this vital safety project. Despite having the means to help during the power outage, he chose to stay warm in his own home while his neighbors suffered. And now, he is using legal technicalities to prevent us from installing a backup heating system that could save lives. She made me sound like a monster. Several people in the crowd were nodding along. Margaret continued, Mr. Garrett claims that he owns the gas infrastructure for our community. He has threatened to shut off gas service to all of us if we do not give in to his demands. He is holding our neighborhood hostage for his own petty reasons. That was a complete misrepresentation of the facts, and I felt my temper rising. But Tom, sitting next to me, put a hand on my arm and shook his head slightly. Wait, his expression said. We are here tonight to discuss options for moving forward, Margaret said. While we cannot legally force Mr. Garrett to leave the HOA, we can make it clear that his behavior is unacceptable. We can also explore alternative options for the heating project that do not depend on his cooperation. She opened the floor for comments, and several people immediately raised their hands. A woman in her 60s stood up. I was at the community center during the power outage. It was frightening and cold. My husband has a heart condition, and I was worried about him the entire time. I do not understand why Mr. Garrett would not help us. I stood up. May I respond? Margaret looked like she wanted to say no, but people were already nodding and calling for me to speak. During the power outage, I was asked to bring portable heaters to the community center. I do not own portable heaters. My home has a built-in natural gas heating system that cannot be moved. I physically could not help in the way that was being requested. What about your gas line? Someone called out. The community center has gas lines, but they only serve the kitchen appliances. The building uses electric heat. To convert it to gas heat would require major construction and specialized equipment. I am not a licensed gas technician. I could not have done that work even if I wanted to. The woman sat down, looking slightly less hostile. Another person stood up, a younger guy I recognized from a few houses down. But you are blocking the project now. Why? Because the HOA never asked my permission. They issued fines, tried to force me to work for free, and charged me $2,000 to fund a project that requires modifications to property I own. When I pointed out that they needed my permission, they ignored me and moved forward anyway. Margaret interrupted. You are making this about yourself when it is about community safety. No, Margaret. You made this about me when you tried to fine me $500 for not doing something that was literally impossible. You made this about me when you charged me $2,000 for a project that I have to approve. If you had asked me politely from the beginning, we probably would not be here right now. That caused some murmuring in the crowd. A few people were nodding thoughtfully. Tom stood up. If I may add some legal context, Mr. Garrett owns the gas distribution infrastructure for this area through property rights that date back to the 1950s. This is documented and verified. The HOA has no legal authority over that infrastructure. Any modifications require his permission. That is not a technicality. That is property law. How do we know that is true? Karen demanded. Tom held up a folder. I have copies of all the relevant documentation here. Anyone who wants to review it is welcome to. The property records are public information. The HOA's own attorney has confirmed the validity of Mr. Garrett's ownership. Margaret's face was flushed. This is ridiculous. He is one person trying to block the will of the entire community. The will of the community is not relevant when it comes to private property rights, Tom said calmly. You cannot vote to take control of someone else's property, no matter how many people want you to. An older man in the back stood up. I have a question. Samuel, if we ask nicely and drop all the fines and the special assessment, would you approve the gas connection? I paused, considering. Honestly, I do not think the community center needs a gas heating system. We have power outages maybe once a year, and they usually last a few hours. Spending $40,000 for a backup system that might get used once or twice in a decade does not make financial sense. But what if there is a worse emergency? The woman with the husband's heart condition asked. Then we do what we did during this outage. We use the fireplace, we share blankets, we help each other. The power was only out for 5 hours. It was uncomfortable, but no one was in danger. My husband could have died. I am sorry you were scared. I truly am. But a gas heating system at the community center would not have been available during that outage anyway. It did not exist yet. If we have another outage next week, The situation will be exactly the same regardless of what we decide tonight." A different person stood up, a man in his 40s. "What about a compromise? What if we install a smaller system, something less expensive?" I shook my head. "The cost is not really the issue, it is the principle. The HOA has been harassing me for 3 years over minor things. Paint colors, lawn ornaments where I park my truck. And when I did not jump to help during the power outage in a way that was literally impossible, they tried to fine me. Then they tried to force me to fund and work on this project without even asking my permission. I am tired of being treated like a problem that needs to be solved." Margaret stood up. "This is exactly what I am talking about. He is making this personal instead of thinking about the community." "You made it personal, Margaret," I said, and my voice was sharper than I intended. "Every interaction I have had with this board has been hostile and adversarial. You have never once approached me as a neighbor asking for help. It has always been demands and threats and fines. And now you are surprised that I am not eager to cooperate." The room was silent. Even Margaret did not have an immediate comeback. Linda stood up. "I think we need to table this discussion for now. Clearly, there are deeper issues here than just the heating system. Maybe we need to look at how the board has been handling disputes and whether our approach needs to change." Karen turned on her. "Are you seriously taking his side?" "I am saying that we have a pattern of problems with this homeowner, and maybe we need to ask ourselves why. Samuel is not the only person who has complained about the board's approach. He is just the one who has pushed back the hardest." That was news to me, but it made sense. Margaret probably steamrolled over most people's objections. The meeting devolved into arguments after that. Some people supported the heating project and were angry at me for blocking it. Others questioned whether it was really necessary. A few people brought up their own grievances with the board, using the meeting as a chance to air complaints about everything from paint approval delays to uneven enforcement of parking rules. Eventually, Margaret adjourned the meeting without any real resolution. People filed out, some giving me hostile looks, others nodding sympathetically. A few stopped to introduce themselves and thank me for standing up to the board. The older man who had asked about compromise approached me near the door. "Samuel, I am Frank Morrison. I have lived here for 15 years, and I have to say, this is the most excitement we have had in a while." I shook his hand. "I am not trying to cause excitement. I just want to be left alone." "I get that. And between you and me, Margaret has needed someone to stand up to her for a long time. The previous board was much more reasonable. She has been on a power trip since she took over." "You think the community will turn against me over this?" Frank shrugged. "Some will, but most people are reasonable once they understand the full story. The problem is that Margaret is good at spinning things to make herself look like the victim. You are going to need to be patient and keep telling your side." He was right, but I was tired of fighting. I had moved to Prescott for the quiet mountain lifestyle, not to engage in HOA warfare. The next few days were relatively quiet. I did not hear from Margaret or the board, which I took as a good sign. Tom reported that Richard Palmer had officially resigned as the HOA's attorney, stating that he could not ethically represent a client who refused to follow legal advice. "That is going to make things interesting," Tom said. "Without legal counsel, the board is going to have a hard time doing anything that could be challenged in court. Does that mean they will give up on the heating project? Probably not. But it means they will be vulnerable if they try to push it through." The following week, I received a certified letter from a law firm I did not recognize. The letter stated that they were now representing the Whispering Pines HOA, and that they intended to file suit to establish the HOA's right to access and modify community gas infrastructure. Tom read the letter and laughed. "They hired Stuart Chen." He is an ambulance chaser who mostly does personal injury work. This is way out of his depth. So we are going to court. Looks like it. Do not worry, we have all the documentation on our side. This will get dismissed pretty quickly. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later, the HOA vs. Samuel Garrett, claiming that the gas distribution system constituted community infrastructure and that the HOA had a right to make improvements for the safety and welfare of residents. The filing made the local news. A reporter from the Prescott Daily Courier called me for comment. I kept it brief. This is a property rights issue. The HOA is attempting to take control of infrastructure that I legally own. We will let the courts decide. The article ran the next day under the headline HOA sues homeowner over gas line dispute. It was fairly balanced, presenting both sides of the issue. But the comments section online was brutal. Half the people called me selfish and accused me of endangering the community. The other half supported my property rights and criticized the HOA for overreach. My phone rang constantly with reporters from other local media outlets wanting interviews. I declined most of them, not wanting to turn this into more of a circus than it already was. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, life in Whispering Pines became increasingly uncomfortable. Some neighbors stopped talking to me. Someone left a nasty note on my truck calling me a selfish jerk. I noticed people staring when I went to check my mail, but there were also supporters. Frank Morrison stopped by with a bottle of wine and words of encouragement. Linda sent me a text apologizing for the board's behavior. A few other neighbors made a point of saying hello and telling me they understood my position. Tom filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit on the grounds that the HOA had no legal standing to claim ownership of my property. The motion included all the historical documentation of the gas infrastructure, expert testimony about property rights, and citations from similar cases where HOA overreach had been rejected by courts. Stuart Chen filed a response that was, frankly, embarrassing. It relied mostly on emotional arguments about community welfare and safety, with very little actual legal grounding. He tried to argue that the HOA's responsibility to provide for member safety superseded individual property rights, citing cases that were not remotely relevant. "This guy is grasping at straws," Tom said. "I almost feel bad for him. Margaret probably sold him a completely different version of the facts." The hearing itself was anticlimactic. We appeared before Judge Raymond Foster, a no-nonsense man in his 60s who had a reputation for being fair but strict. Stuart Chen presented his case first, emphasizing the community's need for emergency preparedness and painting me as an obstacle to safety. When it was our turn, Tom simply presented the property documentation and explained the legal history of the gas infrastructure. He pointed out that the HOA had not existed when the gas lines were installed, that I had inherited clear ownership, and that the HOA had no legal basis to claim control over private property. Judge Foster asked a few clarifying questions, then took a brief recess to review the documents. When he returned, his ruling was swift. "I am dismissing this case. Mr. Garrett's ownership of the gas distribution infrastructure is well documented and legally sound. The HOA's argument that community safety concerns override property rights is not supported by law. The HOA has no standing to claim control over infrastructure that clearly belongs to Mr. Garrett." He looked at Stuart Chen. "Counsel, I would recommend that your client seek resolution through negotiation rather than litigation. This case should never have been filed." Margaret, sitting in the gallery, looked like she had been slapped. Karen sat next to her, stone-faced. Linda was not present outside the courthouse. Tom was grinning. That went even better than I expected. Foster basically called their lawsuit frivolous. So it is over. The lawsuit is over. Whether Margaret accepts defeat is another question. She did not. 2 days after the hearing, I received notice of another special assessment. This time, the stated purpose was legal fees related to defending community interests. Every homeowner was being charged $1,000 to cover the cost of the lawsuit that the HOA had just lost. I called Tom immediately. Can they do this? No. You cannot charge homeowners to pay for a lawsuit that the board chose to pursue against the legal advice of their previous attorney. This is going to get them in serious trouble. Tom was right. Within a week of the assessment notice going out, several homeowners had contacted their own lawyers. A group of about 30 residents filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board, alleging misuse of funds and abuse of authority. The state investigation moved quickly. An auditor reviewed the HOA's financial records and found multiple irregularities. The special assessment for the heating system had included significant padding, with costs inflated by nearly 50%. The contractor who was supposed to do the work was owned by Karen's brother-in-law. That explained a lot. This had never really been about community safety. It had been a scheme to funnel HOA funds to a connected contractor. The auditor also found that Margaret had been charging personal expenses to the HOA account, including meals, gas, and even a weekend trip to Sedona that was supposedly for board training. The state board held a hearing and found the Whispering Pines HOA board guilty of financial mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. Margaret and Karen were removed from the board immediately and banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 5 years. They were also ordered to repay the misappropriated funds. Linda, who had consistently voted against the problematic actions, was cleared of wrongdoing, but it got worse for Margaret and Karen. The inflated contractor costs and the family connection triggered a criminal investigation. The county prosecutor's office got involved, looking into whether the special assessment constituted fraud. 3 months after the original power outage, I watched from my porch as police cars pulled up to Margaret's house. She was arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement. Karen was arrested the same day at her workplace. The charges alleged that they had conspired to defraud HOA members by inflating the cost of the heating project and directing the excess funds to Karen's brother-in-law, who would then kick back a portion to them. The case made regional news. Former HOA presidents arrested in fraud scheme ran in papers across Arizona. The story detailed how a dispute over gas line ownership had led to the unraveling of a corruption scheme that had apparently been going on for over a year. The trial happened surprisingly quickly. Both Margaret and Karen were advised by their lawyers to take plea deals. They pleaded guilty to reduced charges of misdemeanor fraud and were sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. With Margaret and Karen gone, the HOA held emergency elections. Linda was elected president by a landslide. 2 other reasonable people I knew vaguely were elected to the board. Linda's first act as president was to rescind all the fines that had been issued to me. Her second act was to issue a formal written acknowledgement that I owned the gas distribution infrastructure and that the HOA had no authority over it. Her third act was to apologize, publicly and in writing, for the harassment I had endured. The special assessment for the heating system was canceled, and the money that had already been collected was refunded to homeowners. The bogus legal fees assessment was also canceled. Frank Morrison, who had been elected to the board as well, stopped by my house with the official documents. "We want to start fresh," he said. "No more adversarial relationship. We are all neighbors and we should act like it." I appreciate that. I do have one question, though. If there is ever another power outage and we genuinely need help with heating at the community center, would you be willing to assist? Of course. If you ask politely and work with me to find a legal solution, I am happy to help. I was never opposed to helping the community. I was opposed to being bullied and extorted. That is what I thought. Margaret really did handle this in the worst possible way. The new board was competent and reasonable. They focused on actual community issues like road maintenance and landscaping, instead of harassing homeowners over minor violations. The atmosphere in Whispering Pines improved dramatically. I ran into Karen once at the grocery store several months after the trial. She saw me, turned bright red, and quickly left without buying anything. I almost felt bad for her, but then I remembered how she had tried to fine me, force me to work for free, and charge me $2,000 for her brother-in-law's benefit. Margaret I never saw again. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that she had moved to Tucson to live with her sister. Apparently, the scandal had been too much for her to bear in Prescott. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it gets. I continued working at my engineering firm, enjoyed my warm house during winter, and actually started participating in some community events now that the HOA was not constantly on my case about something. The gas distribution system that had caused so much trouble continued operating as it had for decades, quietly supplying natural gas to hundreds of homes. Southwest Gas continued paying me a modest annual lease fee, which I had honestly forgotten about until all of this started. I used the money to finally fix some of the Victorian house's original woodwork. One particularly cold evening in December, almost a year after the original power outage, the electricity went out again. This time, Linda called me personally. "Samuel, we have about 20 people at the community center. I know the electric heat is out. Do you have any suggestions for keeping people comfortable until power is restored? How long is the estimate? 3 to 4 hours. A car hit a pole down on Granite Creek Road. The fireplace should be enough for that time period with that many people. Body heat will help too. If it looks like it is going to be longer, call me back and I will see what I can do. Thank you. And Samuel, I really am sorry about how Margaret treated you. I know, it is all in the past now." The power came back on after 3 hours. No one froze. No one panicked. The community handled a minor emergency like reasonable adults. That is how things should have been from the beginning. But it took a ridiculous fight over gas lines, a frivolous lawsuit, a state investigation, and criminal charges to get there. Was it worth it? I think so. Not because I enjoyed the conflict, but because it established an important principle. HOAs do not have unlimited power. Property rights matter. And homeowners should not be bullied by petty tyrants on a power trip. My great-great-grandfather probably never imagined that his 1950s deal with the gas company would become the center of an HOA controversy 70 years later. But I like to think he would have appreciated the irony. He was apparently a stubborn man who did not back down when he believed he was right. I come by it honestly. The Victorian house still stands, warm and comfortable, heated by the same natural gas infrastructure that caused so much trouble. The subdivision built around it continues to function, now with leadership that actually serves the community instead of trying to control it. And me. I park my truck in my driveway, keep my historical marker on the lawn, and live my life without constant harassment from the HOA. Sometimes standing your ground is worth the fight. Sometimes property rights that seem like ancient history turn out to be incredibly relevant. And sometimes the person who looks like they have all the power is actually depending on the goodwill of the person they are trying to bully. Margaret learned that lesson the hard way. I just wish it had not taken fraud charges and public humiliation to get there. But that is the thing about people like Margaret. They cannot conceive of a world where they do not get their way. They push and push, escalating every situation, convinced that enough pressure will make people fold. They never consider that eventually they might push someone who has the means and the will to push back harder. I was not trying to be a hero. I was not making some grand statement about individual liberty versus collective authority. I just wanted to be left alone to live in my house without constant interference. The fact that this simple desire led to criminal charges and a complete restructuring of the HOA board says more about Margaret than it does about me. Frank Morrison likes to joke that I should run for the board myself. I always decline. I have no interest in managing community affairs or making decisions about pool maintenance and street lighting. I just want to enjoy my property in peace, which finally I can do. The story could have ended differently. If Margaret had approached me politely from the beginning, asking for help instead of demanding it, I probably would have worked with the HOA to find a solution. If she had not tried to find me and force me to work for free, I might never have even learned about my ownership of the gas infrastructure. Her own aggressive tactics led directly to her downfall. That is poetic justice, I suppose. These days, when I sit by my fireplace on cold winter evenings, I sometimes think about that night Margaret pounded on my door demanding I heat the community center. I remember the outrage in her voice, the absolute certainty that she had the authority to make demands of me. I wonder if she ever thinks about it, if she ever replays the situation in her head and sees the moment where she could have chosen a different path. Probably not. People like Margaret rarely have that kind of self-awareness, but I learned something from the experience too. I learned that knowing your rights is important. I learned that good documentation matters. I learned that having a competent attorney is worth every penny. Most importantly, I learned that communities function better when leadership serves the people instead of trying to control them. The new HOA board understands that. They work with homeowners instead of against them. They seek solutions through cooperation instead of threats. It is amazing what a difference that makes. So here I sit, in my warm house, on property that my family has owned for over a century, connected to infrastructure that my great-great-grandfather had the foresight to secure. The gas flows, the heat works, and the HOA leaves me alone. That is all I ever wanted. And if there is another power outage and the community genuinely needs help, I will be there. Because I am part of this community, and I do care about my neighbors. I just will not be bullied into it by someone on a power trip who thinks a title gives them unlimited authority. Margaret learned that the hard way. The rest of us learned it too, just by watching, and Whispering Pines is better for it.